Hello, welcome to Post Colonial Space. I'm Masood Raja, and this is another video in my series on AP literature. Now, a general disclaimer that any of these videos on AP English literature and composition are in no way affiliated with the College Board, nor are they approved or sponsored by them. I'm mostly recording these for my students, but of course you can use these as well. Today, I'll talk about the second main constituent part of a story or a novel, and that is the setting. Now, I already did one video on character and characterizations. These are covered in AP under the general rubric of big ideas. So the students need to learn what is character and how characterization works, and also setting and narration and structure and other things. Today we'll talk about the setting. Now, setting in any given story or a novel, there is always a temporal and a spatial setting. Stories exist in time and space, just like we exist in time and space. So the first step in studying the setting and talking about it and writing about it would be, of course, to point out the obvious. Where is the story set and what time frame? That's the basic. Then we make it slightly more complex, right? We look at what's the general setting of the story, and then within that, what specific temporal and spatial settings are offered. Right? So let's say it's a story set in 1890s. It's at a plantation. Okay, that's spatial setting and timings and temporal setting. Then we go into within the story what happens during the day, what happens at night, what happens at midday. Are there any references to these times? If it's a plantation, are they covering the master's house, the slave quarters, the lady of the houses? Those are specific settings within the larger setting. Then another important aspect of the setting is to see what does it do? What's its function, right? Does it enable us to understand the story better? Does it set the stage for actors to act a certain way? Does it influence the character's behavior? Does it influence the plot? That would be a higher level of sophistication in reading the setting. The temporal setting and spatial setting, what influence does it have? What does it do within a story? So overall, spatial and temporal settings, larger, and then the smaller settings within the story that you look at and you work on. Now, I do have two handouts that I use. So first one, I think we can go here. If you look at the screen, here are some of the questions to ask of the setting. Now, by the way, these insights come from the Norton Guide to AP English, and I'll put a link in the description to the book. So what is the significance of the location? That could be one part, wherever the story is set. Is it important to know why it is set there? Are there contrast in locations? Is there one location maybe that's offered as a peaceful location, the parents' home, and another one as a conflictual and terrible or bad location, right? The husband's house. So how do they compare, right, within the larger setting? What is the significance of the time of the day or time of the year? Is it a story set around Halloween, right? Is it a story set around Christmas? Those things will have an impact on the plot as well as on the actor and characters. Sorry. What does the weather add? Is a cyclone coming? Is a hurricane coming? There is a novel by Z. Edgell, right? Bika Lamb. The final culminating of it is this huge hurricane that's coming. That's part of the setting, right? Are there historical or cultural implications of the setting that affect characters, plot, or actual meaning? Is it a story set in a former battlefield, right? If it is, does that impact the characters within it, right? Is it a historical bridge, a historical library, historical building, right? Is it a story set in a museum, right? People find something there. You can see that in popular books too. That has an impact of what develops in terms of the plot and characters. How does the setting reinforce what happens to a character? Is it because they are at the wrong place or at a wrong time? There are a lot of movies, Gothic novels, and stories which all depend on where you are. Things happen because of the setting. I mean, this is slightly off the mark, but the famous essay by Derrida, and this is not pertinent to my high school students, the famous essay or book chapter called Plato's Pharmacy, where Socrates is talking to a young man who has a speech that he wants Socrates to take a look at. And Derrida's argument that this is a unique dialogue out of all the Plato's dialogues. Derrida's argument is that this is the only one that has a rural setting, a setting outside the city. All other dialogues, Socrates is within the city. This is the only dialogue where they are in nature by a river. And that setting for Derrida is peculiar and important in understanding the dialogue. So, just like what Derrida says in that context, where the story is set can have an impact on the plot, can have an impact on what the characters do, and that's why it is important to know that. It is important to study the setting. I also have a worksheet, and I'll put it on the screen, which I used actually last week. And this is just an exercise about setting. Now remember, we never really just think in terms of character, setting, tone, structure. All of these things are working together in our mind as we are analyzing a story. But this worksheet would kind of help you to help your students isolate setting as a topic of their analysis and then go about finding out things about it. So if you look at this worksheet, it's pretty simple. You can draw it, you can make it on a computer. The first box at the top is setting, then textual evidence, then inference, and function. So they take any instance of a reference to a setting, temporal, or you can say spatial, and they put it in the first column. Then textual evidence is where in the text is that mentioned. So they put a little sentence page number there. Inference, to infer. Inference is they as readers saying, this is what I think it implies. This is what it could mean, or this is what it suggests. That's their inference from actual statement of the setting itself, the textual evidence, and what conclusions do they draw from it, right? And then function is, what does it do? If the main character is out in the cold late at night with her baby, that's part of the setting. She's in the fields, part of the setting. Textual evidence, page 22. Inference, maybe she's scared. Maybe she's leaving her husband. Maybe she has been driven out of her house. Function, that temporal setting at night out in the fields makes it possible for us to see this character in a different light. That's its function. So they use this worksheet and go about taking, 5 to 8 examples of different setting scenes or settings, looking at what textually, how it is described, what do they infer from it, draw from it, and how does it influence the main character or the plot? How does it function? What is its function within the story? And that roughly is the analysis of the setting and its significance. So to sum up, setting is one of the major constituent parts of any story, any novel, any play. To study it, we study it both in terms of time and space, larger and smaller spaces and temporal divisions within a narrative. Then we try to study what could it mean? How does it influence the plot, right? What does it enable? And what's its function as the setting? And that would enable us to understand the plot better as well as the characters. So that roughly is my brief explanation of the setting as part of the big ideas in the AP English class. But you can take these ideas and use them in any other classroom as well when you're teaching how to write about literature. That's it. I hope this was useful to you. Let me know what you think. And as always, stay safe, take care of each other. And from me to you, as always, peace and love.